Ladies and gentlemen, greetings. First of all, I would like to welcome all of you to this fourth webinar as part of a series of webinars held by EPC in Abu Dhabi to foresee the consequences of the coronavirus crisis on the world and the region. This webinar focuses on analyzing economic and political challenges facing Turkey post-corona future shifts. Turkey is ranked 9th in the world in terms of the number of confirmed cases of COVID-19. As the rest of the world countries, Turkish authorities are busy combating this pandemic and facing its social and economic consequences. Locally, President Erdogan and his government's management of the crisis draw domestic criticism. It seems that the Justice and Development Party has suffered from weakness in facing the pandemic when it shows hesitance in taking timely, strong, and decisive decisions. Inability to implement promises to support the economy and prevent an economic depression, and turning the crisis into an element of a new political struggle between the government and the opposition. The government weakness was also evident in the debate that surrounded the resignation of the Interior Minister. On the economic side, the coronavirus crisis hit the country as Turkish economy was already suffering from the depreciation of the Turkish lira and increasing inflation and high rates of unemployment and debt. Therefore, it's likely that the country will enter a period of prolonged economic stagnations. At the foreign policy level, while Turkey heavily invested in the so-called disaster diplomacy through sending medical assistance to more than 81 countries around the world, according to a statement by Turkish Foreign Minister. Ankara's military involvement in Middle East, particularly in Syria, Libya, and Eastern Mediterranean, is still facing grave challenges. This can be attributed to the nature of the country's internal political environment as well as prevalent regional and global political environments. Therefore, today's webinar will discuss the economic and political challenges that Turkey is facing during coronavirus crisis. We are pleased to host a select of Turkish experts and scholars to discuss this issue, including Dr. Omar Tashpinar, Professor of National Security Strategy at U.S. National War College in Washington, D.C., and Dr. Atilla Yeşil Ada, co-founder of Istanbul Analytics, and Dr. Mustafa Kubulay, a Turkish financial consultant and economist. I would like to welcome our speakers for today and thank them for accepting our invitation to participate in this event. I would also like to welcome all our viewers who watch this webinar on EPC's account on various social media platforms and the Center's YouTube channel via Zoom application. Before I give the floor to speaker, I would like to draw the attention of our Arab viewers that they can listen to the Arabic interpretation of the discussion by clicking on the French channel on the icon of language down the screen. Now I would like to ask speakers to give us 3 minutes to 4 minutes statements telling us their views, and I will start with Dr. Omar Tashpinar. Thank you all. Please, Dr. Omar.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ibtisam, for the invitation. It's a pleasure to reconnect with the Emirates Policy Center and with your viewers. We have a very good panel, and Dr. Yeşilada and Dr. Kubilay are eminent economists, so I will not focus my brief comments on the economy, but I would like to say that the real challenge facing Erdogan right now with the coronavirus, more than the political situation, which I think he's still trying to manage and he can manage, is more the economic downturn in Turkey. And this is much harder to spin. He can spin the political situation and present the current dynamics of as a success story. And in fact, his ability to control the media allows him to do so. If you are watching usually Turkish TV, which is predominantly controlled by cronies of AKP and Erdogan, you would get the sense that Turkey is very successful in managing this crisis, and that we're basically giving lessons to the world about effective management with strong institutions. The hospitals have handled the crisis well, the casualties are low. So there's a tendency to portray this as, compared to the United States and Europe, as a Turkish success story. So much so that there was speculation up until very recently whether Erdogan would dare to call snap elections, that basically he would basically use this opportunity as to say, well, maybe he doesn't have really a very long prospect of economic growth. The economic situation is going down, and maybe this is a narrowing window of opportunity for him to call elections and to present the way Turkey has handled the crisis as a success story. And because normally if he waits until 2023, which is the regular time when elections will be held for both the presidency and the parliament, most predictions argue that the situation is not very good. So it's very likely that he will be in a more difficult position in a couple of years in the economic side, and that he can try to spin the political situation right now as a positive story. One can add to the positive story the success, the so-called success that Turkey is experiencing now in foreign policy, especially in Libya. There's a tendency to portray what happened in the last couple of weeks as a tide turning in favor of the party that Turkey has been supporting, the government of national accord in Tripoli. This could also play in Turkish politics as a big success story. But overall, I think this weekend, President Erdogan signaled that there is still 3 years for election, that he did not really indicate that there will be snap elections. But of course, hinting that there would be elections would defeat the purpose of a surprise election. So I'm still not ruling out the possibility of a surprise election this summer, because simply put, time is not on Erdogan's side for a couple of factors. The first one is the economy, and I'm sure Mr. Yeşilada and Kubilay will talk about that, Murat will talk about that. But the second one is the fact that there are new political parties emerging in Turkey. Mr. Ali Babacan's party is showing signs of gaining traction. As your viewers probably know, Mr. Babacan has formed a new political party, and he has a reputation for being a good economic technocrat. He has a legacy behind him of basically the good years, the golden years of the AKP. So his political party, in addition with Mr. Ahmet Davutoğlu's political party, are two new additions that could potentially steal votes from the AKP base. So this is not good news for Erdogan, who needs basically to win to win the presidency one more time, 51% of the votes. So he cannot afford to lose many votes to even smaller political parties. These small political parties are in no position to win elections, but they could easily form coalitions, as we have seen last summer in the municipal elections. When the opposition can unite, there can be really an effective challenge to Erdogan. And that's the second point I would like to make, the possibility of the opposition to unite. Right now, what we are seeing is basically the CHP, the main center-left political party, that is now running the municipality of Istanbul and Ankara, doing a decent job in terms of governance. And overall, there is a sense that the CHP, together with the support of E-Party, which is a splinter group from the Nationalist Action Party, and E-Party's leader Meral Akşener is also an effective politician. These two, combined with the potential addition of Ali Babacan and Ahmet Davutoğlu, could form an effective opposition bloc, with the condition, however, that they remain united. And the second condition is that they receive the votes of the Kurdish bloc. The Kurdish bloc, which is an important player in Turkish politics right now.
We will go in details through Q&A.
So right now, I would like to conclude by saying that there is still a chance that Erdogan will spin the current political situation in Turkey as a success story and call early elections, because time is not on his side. New political parties are emerging and the economy is not doing well.
Thank you, Dr. Ömer. Dr. Atillay, please, 3 minutes.
First of all, thanks for the invitation. I always enjoy these seminars or webinars, and it's my pleasure to be here. We haven't officially shared topics among us, but Dr. Kubilay, if it's okay, I would like you to cover the economy. I want to talk about the outbreak, the COVID-19 outbreak, and a lot of things that are misunderstood about the Turkish epidemic. Is that okay?
Yes.
Okay. First of all, Turkey has roughly 160,000 cases, which is very high. It's one of the leading countries in Turkey in terms of cases. And the battle against COVID-19 has not been won. Turkey has stalled at 1,000 cases per day. And I don't think that's going to go down. A comment needs to be made about Turkey's very low death rate. Now, Financial Times investigated several countries. Death rates are always understated, and that's not on purpose. It's just too much bookkeeping, too much confusion about methodology of the causes of death. But what Turkey does is when a patient is admitted to the hospital, immediately a viral drug imported from China and this quinine, the Quinax drug, the malaria drug, is administered. The malaria drug has severe side effects, and my conversation with physicians, as well as a statement by Turkish Medical Association today, questioned the utility of this drug and what happened to the patients who have been discharged from the hospitals. This drug causes heart attacks, kidney failure, and is extremely high risk. The regular usage of this drug could cause a large number of deaths within a year. So in that sense, Turkey's death figures are understated. Why do I think Turkey has not been able to get on top of the COVID outbreak? Because despite promises, we refuse to do random national sampling, at least for high-risk groups. For instance, has anyone heard about Syrians lately? What happened to them?
Just
Okay.
those, they send them to Libya.
Yeah, and to Idlib. Syrians are only good to die for Turkey. I feel sorry for the people. Or the Kurds. I have looked closely at the new patient to test ratio, which remains stuck at 4.5%. So hypothetically, currently the ministry is conducting about 20,000 tests per day. Hypothetically, if it were to conduct 100,000 cases, Turkey would be reporting 4,000 new patients each day. There are clusters of virus which are springing up everywhere as restrictions are eased. Gaziantep, which is close to Syrian border, of which I shall speak more. Kurdish provinces, as well as the provinces that are close to Iran and the Caucasus borders. And why is that so? We imagine a map of Turkey, the eastern map. Currently, Chechnya and Dagestan, which are very close to Turkey, though not right at the border, are at the peak of a coronavirus epidemic. I mean, I really feel sorry for these people because there is not enough medical services. And there's a lot of human trafficking through Georgia. Iran has not gained control of the virus as well. Only last month, 200 illegal refugees have been apprehended in Van, in the province of Van, which means at least another 200 detected apprehension. These are new virus vectors that shall continuously vex and harass Turkey. But the biggest problem is Syria and Iraq, where human trafficking and goods smuggling has been a traditional business for 1,000 years. I don't find Iraq and Syrian numbers credible at all, simply because no one is testing. Uh, I would issue the hypothesis that a second wave in Turkey would come from Syria, simply because the Kurdish region east of Euphrates has already detected 6 cases. No one knows how many cases there are in Idlib because there is no test facility. All the tests have need to be sent to Damascus, and Damascus just doesn't send back the results. As well, again, Turkey is in the same situation as most emerging markets like India, Russia, even Brazil. It is a very tough dilemma between poverty and public health. And I don't blame the AKP government for initiating normalization procedures before the virus is completely wiped out, simply because Turkey doesn't have the financial resources to support so many poor people. According to a recent survey by ANAR, a center-right surveying agency, 50% of the participants said they have lost income, 36% said they have increased their debt, and 19% said they have closed their shops. You can't live with these figures for long. But what I'm blaming...
We'll be back to you with the Q&A.
Yeah, okay, let me just 2 sentences.
Okay.
I think before we can talk about economic recovery and Turkey's political role in the post-COVID world, I need to warn everyone that there will be a second wave of virus, and that would be a tremendous psychological and political shock, not to mention completely undermine the economy. I expect clusters of cases over summer and a very hard second wave in autumn and winter months.
Thank you. Dr. Kobolai, please.
First, thank you very much for this invitation. It's very nice to see you all again, the fellows of the EPC. And I will try to use my time as efficient as possible. And let me check my notes. Okay, it's better to start with the channels of the impact of coronavirus. How the coronavirus economic impact started in Turkey. First, the sharp, you know that there's a big loss in the global supply chain, and this leads to a sharp decline in the foreign trade of Turkey, and not only in goods market, but also the services industry and tourism. Last year, in 2019, Turkey has gained around 30 billion US dollars in this tourism industry, but this year this will be less than 10 billion, according to my optimistic figures. And second channel is a sudden stop in the domestic trade due to self-quarantine and lockdowns in Turkey, and these are implemented in each weekends in the last 2 months. Mm-hmm. Third channel is the investors' reaction. I mean, there is a loss of risk appetite in the global markets, and Turkey is heavily indebted in the foreign currencies. Then this leads to an exodus of capital from Turkey, and not only from Turkey, but also the other EM countries, emerging market countries. And the fourth point is not a channel, instead it's a reaction of Turkish government to the coronavirus epidemics, pandemic, a fiscal stimulus, and accommodative monetary policy implemented. I will try to explain all these with some numbers, and this will make the current situation is more clear. First, the Turkish lira is depreciated more than 15%, starting from the late January. It was 5.85 and now 6.75. And secondly, more than 10 billion US dollars left the country. And thirdly, the private banks are very are unwilling to provide loans to their customers. Therefore, they start downsizing their balance sheet. And third, state banks became more active, and they are the major source of credit to the industry of Turkey. And fourthly, the Turkish budget deficit is the highest of all time, not only in Turkish lira, but also in the US dollar terms. And this is not a sustainable number. And another point is Turkish central bank started a monetary expansion with some covert operations, and this leads to the harsh depreciation of Turkish lira and the mid-run. And then another point, the foreign exchange reserve of Central Bank of Republic of Turkey. The gross reserves are, the level of the gross reserves is one of the lowest of all time in 2000, during the ruling party of AKP. But the net reserves is much less than this. And when we exclude the swaps, I mean the FX reserves, foreign exchange reserves borrowed by the other central banks and the private banks, then the net reserve of the Central Bank of Turkey is less than zero. This is very eye-catching point. And final point, there are some new implementations of the banking authority, and there is now a friction in the convertibility of Turkish lira. This is a very big problem for the foreign investors. Now, when you want to buy a foreign currency or even gold in Turkey, you have to pay a 1% tax. And moreover, the banking authority also implemented another measure to prevent the speculative attacks for the Turkish lira, is lowering its liquidity in the international markets. Therefore, Turkish economy is very harshly, heavily affected by not only in economic terms, but also in the financial terms of this coronavirus pandemics.
Thank you, Dr. Mustafa. Before I move to Q&A, I would like also again to remind our Arabs viewers that they want to listen to the interpretation. They should go to the icon interpretation down on the screen, click on it and choose French language to hear the Arabic interpretation. للمتابعين باللغة العربية يمكنكم الضغط على الأيقونة التي عليها interpretation واختيار اللغة الفرنسية لسماع الترجمة بالعربية. My first question to Dr. Tashbinar. Dr. Omar, can coronavirus crisis reshape Turkey's politics?
Well, in many ways, I think it is already reshaping Turkish politics because of the economic downturn. The economic downturn is key for a realignment of Turkish politics with a new election. So if there is an election right now, I think there's a strong chance that what happened last year with the Istanbul elections could once again become the result. There are two new political parties, as I mentioned, Babacan, Mr. Babacan and Davutoğlu. These two political parties on their own are able to get, according to polls, around 10 to 15%. So you have the municipalities of Turkey under the administration of the CHP. That in itself was a new development. And so on top of that, you have an unprecedented economic downturn. As Kubilay mentioned, Murat Kubilay mentioned, you have a situation where the sense that business as usual cannot continue. There has to be some drastic changes. And if there are elections tomorrow, I think there's a strong chance that what happened in Istanbul, if the opposition is united, could once again reemerge if the opposition is united. So in that sense, I believe the coronavirus has already had a major impact on the economy. Mr. Yeşilada mentioned all the impact on the health sector and what could go worse than now. That in itself is another additional factor. If a second wave comes, if there is no income coming from tourism, and if there are basically the eastern parts of Turkey, the Kurdish areas, which are impacted even more, that could also turn into a governance crisis. So overall, what Turkey is facing is a governance crisis. It's a major governance crisis. And such downturns have the potential to create realignment in Turkish politics. I have always argued that the only way for Erdogan to lose an election would be if there's a major economic crisis, a major economic downturn. Historically, Turkish political realignments have occurred in the wake of major economic downturns. Erdogan came in the aftermath of the 2001 financial crisis, which was the worst financial crisis in the Turkish Republic's history. So I think the short answer to your question is yes, there is a potential for realignment right now. However, the opposition is very divided. There has to be a sense of unity. They have to agree on one leader, unite behind the leader. The challenge, however, is that once they come to power, I'm not sure that they will be able to govern because the opposition is simply too divided. They know what they don't want. They don't want Erdogan, but I'm not sure the opposition, such a large, diverse opposition, can agree on what they want to achieve for Turkey, other than larger generic notions such as justice, rule of law, and democracy. I'm not sure that this is an ideologically very coherent opposition. There's a lack of coherence in this opposition.
Thank you. Dr. Yeşilada, what are the adjustments or changes that would affect the Turkish economic experience or model after Corona?
I think the current model of credit-led growth is that Dr. Kubilay alluded to it, but Turkish banks' actual bad loans could be as high as 15% of their balance sheets. Turkish banks, not only state banks, but private banks will have to be privatized. I'm sorry, recapitalized. To be, and I don't want to get into the details, there is no way out for Turkey economically without an IMF standby program. 3, it has become very obvious until Turkey returns to a rule-based regime, there will be neither FDI nor financial capital flowing into Turkey, which would constantly keep Turkish lira weak, or the current account deficit very low, which means we can't import the investment goods to grow. Obviously, there are advantages. Assuming a future where reform is made, Turkey could be the major beneficiary of onshoring and bringing supply chains near the production centers of Europe. Turkey does have a very broad industrial capacity, now very cheap labor costs after the current depreciation, distance advantage vis-a-vis the Asian suppliers. And finally, of course, it has a very open FDI regime that is very inviting to foreign investors. But that's not going to happen until Turkey accepts the supremacy of justice over Mr. Erdogan and complete rule of law and privacy of property.
Thank you. Dr. Mustafa, does Turkish governmental institution and private sector have the flexibility and accurate scientific approach to redirect their investments in line with the new power trends in the world, as well as the fields that countries would need after Corona?
Can you please repeat the question, please?
Okay, I'm asking, does Turkish governmental institutions and private sector have the flexibility and the accurate scientific approach to redirect their investment in line with the new power trends in the world, as well as the fields that countries would need after Corona?
Thank you very much for this question, because the scientific approach is a very expensive product in Turkey. I mean, you can't easily find it in the government, but not also in government, but also in the private institutions in Turkey are more closely implemented heterodox policies. I mean, try to get rid of the conventional ways of managing with the crisis, instead trying to use very extraordinary policies. For example, most of the countries in all around the world implies policies to stabilize their foreign exchange market. But what we do in Turkey is borrowing more from the markets to sell these FX reserves to be a bigger, wider, larger speculative attack to Turkish lira in the near future. So it's very hard to talk about the scientific approach to deal with the outcomes of the coronavirus.
Thank you. Dr. Omar, how will the economic policies adopted by the Turkish government to deal with the fallout from the coronavirus crisis reflect on the unresolved issues in the country, such as the Kurdish issue and the Syrian refugees?
Well, you could look at it from two ways. The right way to approach the economic problems is to address the political problems. As Mr. Yeşilada mentioned, you need institutional reforms. You need a government that is able to establish the rule of law and that is able to figure out a way to get more foreign direct investment. If such structural reforms are implemented, I think the Kurdish problem and overall the human rights issues in Turkey, the illiberal trend would end. In general, what the world and the institutions like the World Bank or the IMF would want from Turkey is to change the institutional structure of the country. And that would be definitely a step in the right direction. On the other hand, if the government decides to maintain its populist policies and decides to basically go for early elections and continues to basically finance the kind of remaining growth rate through more spending, more inflationary policies, continuing with the absence of rule of law, I think the structural problems of Turkey, such as the Kurdish problem, would only get worse. Right now, it is obvious that the Kurdish political party in Turkey feels increasingly marginalized because they have won municipal elections in large parts of the southeast, and most of their mayors have been basically taken out from their positions, and government state appointees were placed to replace in their place. So we have a situation where you have a Kurdish problem in Turkey, which is basically getting worse. And overall, the human rights problems, the freedom of speech, the absence of rule of law problems, all these, the absence of an independent media, all these problems are getting worse. And I don't see a solution to the economic problems of Turkey without structural reforms that will basically address these political problems. And it would also help to address the economic problems as well, because the economic problems require political solutions.
What about the Syrian refugees?
The Syrian refugees are now part of a major debate in Turkey. I mean, the Syria policy of Erdogan has been perceived by the Turkish public opinion as a major blunder. If there's a major blunder, as the title of this panel indicates, it has been really on Syria. And what happened in Idlib, in many ways, with the killing of almost 40 Turkish soldiers, proved that Turkish relations with Russia is also not an alternative to good relations with the West. And No one, I think, believes that Turkey can get rid of the 4 million Syrian refugees very easily. You joked earlier that we can send some of them to Libya. The reality is that you can only send mercenaries to Libya. And the problem for Turkey regarding Idlib is the risk of getting even more refugees to Turkey. And that's why Erdogan is basically doubling down on Idlib and maintaining a Turkish presence there to avoid the arrival of more Syrian refugees. But I think the Syrian problem, the Syrian refugees problem, is not a problem that can be addressed as easily as political reforms in Turkey. Because even if there are political reforms, I think the Syrian refugees in Turkey are there to stay unless there is a miraculous situation that will really change the dynamics in Syria. I don't see how Turkey can get rid of these 4 million Syrian refugees. There has to be a long-term planning about how to integrate these Syrians into Turkish society, including social, economic, political integration and decisions such as whether they will become Turkish citizens down the line.
I want to ask you, you mentioned Russia. How can you explain the contradictory policies of Turkey towards Russia between Libya and Syria?
Well, I think the contradiction is not very clear because in both Libya and in Syria, Turkey and Russia are backing the different positions. In Syria, the regime of Bashar Assad is supported by Russia. Turkey is in opposition to the regime of Bashar Assad. So there seems to be some coordination between Russia and Turkey in Syria, but everyone knows that Turkey and Russia are not on the same side when it comes to Syria. And in Libya, we see similar dynamics. In Libya, the tables have turned. Turkey believes that just like Russia's involvement in Syria through the invitation of the Syrian government, through the invitation of Bashar Assad, Turkey believes that it has a legitimate role to play in Libya because the only internationally recognized entity, the GNA, the Government of National Accord, has invited Turkey. And Turkey is basically in Libya, just like Russia is in Syria, through the invitation of the official government. And the entity of Haftar, the Libyan National Army, is presented as an entity that is in rebellion against the legitimate authority of Tripoli. So as far as Russia and Turkey are concerned, they're again, in the context of Libya, they're siding on the opposition. They're basically against each other. They're both supporting opposing groups. The irony of Turkish-Russian relations is that you cannot find a single issue where Russia and Turkey are able to really agree on the right strategic interests. They don't share strategic interests.
Except 400S.
Except for?
400S.
That's right. So you basically have a situation where they differ on everything, almost. Mm-hmm. And the only issue is that there is a level of dependence of Turkey on Russia for a number of reasons. The first one is obviously the energy question. Turkey needs natural gas, and Russia is a big investor on Turkish energy sectors. There are pipelines that makes this interdependence, mostly Turkish dependence on Russia, structural. Turkey receives a lot of tourism from Russia. There is agricultural exports to Russia. So there is some level of economic dependence on Russia. But other than that, when you look at the political situation, geostrategic situation, from Syria to Libya, from Azerbaijan, Armenia to the Balkans to Cyprus, Eastern Mediterranean, there is not a single issue where these two partners agree. It is driven, I think Turkey's good relations with Russia is also driven by anger with United States. And there is this fantasy among some nationalist circles in Turkey who have this fantasy of a Eurasianist foreign policy, of lowering Turkey's dependence on NATO, diminishing Turkish dependence on the United States, and forging a new partnership with Russia, a new kind of geostrategic military partnership with Russia. The S-400 issue was exactly that. to basically purchase Russian missile defense. And it cost Turkey dearly with the F-35 project, with impending sanctions from the US Congress. But overall, I think what happened in Idlib with the Russian military basically giving its green light and arguably engaging itself in killing Turkish soldiers should have an impact on this kind of Eurasian fantasy that Turkey can have a geostrategic alliance with Russia. That's not very realistic. And sooner or later, with Turkey will have to figure out that its political, foreign policy, and economic future lies with the European Union and the West, because that's where the investment is coming. That's where the institutional reforms and the foreign direct investment will come. The foreign direct investment that Turkey needs is not likely to come from Qatar or from Russia. It's likely to come again from the West if Turkey manages to engage in structural reforms.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Atila, how would the potential economic recession affect preset development plans? Who are the winners and losers from changing or adjusting these plans?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, interestingly, the main losers are AKP voters who tend to be overrepresented among small shopkeepers in rural areas or those areas which don't trade with EU or receive tourism revenues and work in low-wage jobs. They will be the losers. Secondly, Turkey's very dynamic and vibrant services industry will be mostly wiped out. Another loser would be Turkey's shopping malls. I mean, this is no small deal. There's a $60 billion investment there and high-end retailers. The energy sector already was completely wiped out. I want to, just Dr. Ömer Taşpınar, Turkey doesn't really need that much natural gas anymore. A, our demand forecasts have declined. B, LNG, spot LNG is available. Why buy long-term contracts? Three, renewable energy is making great strides. So the reason I mentioned that is not to object to Dr. Taşpınar's statements, but to bring forward the proposition that Turkey's current electricity production capacity is completely built on LNG conversion gas plants, and these are becoming obsolete. They are completely loss-making. Who will be the winners? And that's the strange part. I mean, the well-heeled, the CHP and EAP voters who tend to concentrate around the coastal lines and who are from areas which are well integrated into the global marketplace are going to be likely the winners. And of course, another thing that would drive all the political processes that Dr. Taşpınar described is that when the pie is growing, it is easy for AKP both to satisfy its cronies and the general public. When the pie is shrinking, AKP had to make a choice between the cronies and the general public. And that choice seems to have been made largely in favor of economic cronies because silly projects like the Canal Istanbul, but more importantly and damagingly, these huge city hospitals continue to be built on preferential terms. Now, one more word on city hospitals. I'm not against building hospitals, and I am really not well versed enough in medical developments to accept or refute the argument that big hospitals are no longer in fashion. But let me give you an example. The recent Japanese-built hospital or Japanese-financed hospital opened in Başakşehir. Even when there is no traffic, for an emergency case to get from the other end to the Başakşehir, or for 90% of Istanbul population to get the Başakşehir is a 1 hour ordeal. When there is traffic, the low income and middle income classes who are likely to benefit from these state hospitals have no way of getting to those hospitals. So they're completely wasted investments. And I think politically, I completely agree with Dr. Tashpınar. Erdogan will lose. Erdogan has two types of followers. One, the ideological group, like Trump's followers. I mean, you can't change their minds. And that's about 20% of the total electorate. But the others are in it either because they believed in Islamism, which Erdogan violated badly, or because Erdogan brought prosperity. Now that it has become very clear that AKP's ideology has nothing to do with true Islam, and Erdogan is not the magic word for prosperity, I think Erdogan and AKP will be the final losers.
So the Istanbul channel, there is a future for Istanbul channel?
Well, I'm planning to buy a villa right next to it and fish, because when oil prices are so low, why would Russian tankers pay $10,000 to go through the channel? Yeah. Well, you know, I just, there's
Dr. Mustafa, what are the necessary changes that should be made under the current situation to protect foreign investments in the country after coronavirus crisis?
Indeed, this is a very tough question because it's quite a bit late. I mean, if you have Turkish lira denominated assets in Turkey and it's a financial asset, what you need to do is just selling it and take your money out of this country and invest in a very safe haven countries. But if you own a house or a factory or any kind of property, then this will be a little bit difficult. And now it might be better to talk about how you can reinvest in Turkey. Because if there exists one more financial turmoil in Turkey, then the Turkish assets will be very cheap for any foreign investors. Particularly some industries, Dr. Yeşil already mentioned, the energy, tourism, aviation, construction, and I can also add agriculture to these four major industries. They will all be very cheap, and it will be good to have investments in these properties. Otherwise, if it is too late, what you need to do is buying some credit default swap as a kind of financial instrument to buy to protect yourself from the moratorium of Turkey's external debt. It's better if I give you more detail about this, because we have never talked about the possibility of a moratorium of Turkish external debt stock. This is very likely, and if you still own this, I mean, because the Euro bond stock of Turkey is still very high compared with the other emerging market countries, what you need to do is the selling or buying insurance with a CDS. Otherwise, you will not be able to take the money out of this country in the next 6 months. And this is the time we should start to talk about the potential capital controls. And since Turkey has a very high stock of foreign debt, I mean, let me tell you the exact amount, $437 billion, and it's 169 billion of them has maturity less than a year. Then our major topic should be when Turkey will collapse, when Turkey will fail to pay their obligations. So if you ask me what to do with the current investments in Turkey, if they are financial assets, try to sell them in any price, because you will never be able to take your money back if this financial turmoil starts again. But if you have a property or a factory or something else, it's better to hold it and start to find a new targets for you to invest, because it has already been all the bad things has already been done, and there is no way to receive your money as early as possible. So it might be good to invest in some industries, as I mentioned, like tourism, aviation, construction, energy, and agriculture.
Thank you. Dr. Omar, how will political and economic implications of coronavirus crisis affect Turkey's foreign policy options?
Well, we have seen already that in Libya, there is a potential good news story that Erdogan can spin as a success. And if he calls early elections, I'm sure we will hear a lot about how Turkey managed to change the balance in Libya. On the other hand, when you look at the foreign policy of Turkey, like the major problems that Turkey is facing in its foreign policy, vis-a-vis Syria, or in its relations with the European Union, in the Eastern Mediterranean on natural gas, for instance, in Turkish policies with countries like Israel, Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, I don't see how the coronavirus crisis, which is also an economic crisis for Turkey, is would turn into a positive impact for Turkish foreign policy. Populist politicians, populist authoritarian politicians, when they are facing major domestic downturns in the economy, they're no longer able to distribute the largesse, and they're also looking for opportunities to divert attention from domestic problems to foreign policy. So there could be actually a negative side of this coronavirus on Turkish foreign policy, and in the sense that Erdogan may try to galvanize Turkish nationalism with some artificial crisis in order to basically rally people around the flag, rally people around nationalism. This has been a winning strategy for Erdogan, nationalism, and to figure out ways to rally Turkish people behind imagined enemies. He's even trying to portray the economic downturn as a conspiracy of the West against Turkey. So I don't see any positive in the current health coronavirus crisis for Turkish foreign policy. I see only potential negatives with Turkey entering foreign policy adventures. I don't want to speculate about what Turkey could do, but you know, I use the term artificial crisis because you don't want to create a real crisis that would only exacerbate the economy. It should be something superficial, cosmetic, that could rally people around the flag. Picking a small fight with Greece over an island, or maybe on Cyprus, maybe a kind of skirmish in the Eastern Mediterranean, again with maybe an Israeli or Egyptian or Greek boat could fit the bill.
Thank you. Before I will give a question for both of you, Dr. Omar and Attila, before we open the question of the viewers, but I will ask Dr. Mustafa, what impact will coronavirus crisis have on Turkish foreign investments?
As I mentioned earlier, I mean, the very harsh depreciation of Turkish lira will eventually lead to loss of their value in terms of US dollar. That's the first part. Secondly, and we have to talk about the bankruptcy of large conglomerates and some banking institutions of Turkey. It's not in my agenda for the very short term. I don't expect it to happen in 2020. But as Dr. Yeşilada mentioned, that the non-performing loans of these institutions are very high, higher than they reported to the regulatory bodies. So This means that not only in real sector, but also in the banking industry, what you need to do is to try to find the safe assets. And this is not very easy because normally we think that the safest assets are issued by the government. But when we talk about the euro bonds, I mean, it's a kind of financial bonds denominated in the foreign currencies, in the hard currencies like the euro or dollar or yen, the risk of default is very high. And that's why I told you that the CDS is a very well-known measure of bankruptcy risk, default risk is very high for Turkey. It's the second highest after the Argentina in the EM universe. So it's if you still have money in the financial assets, what you need to do is to sell them and leave the country as early as possible. But if you talk about the other properties, there is nothing to do. It would be better to find the new suitable industries to invest in and try to find the weak companies with some potential for the future. Because it's too late, and I can't easily say you a very golden rule to save them or to make the best investment in this time horizon, because of we are very getting near to the new era of Turkish economy and also politics. I mean, we even don't know what will happen next year in the politics. And I want to tell you one more thing, because most of the policy consultants and economists ignore one thing: the potential of social unrest. This is, I think that this is very likely for the last quarter of 2020 and for the entire year of 2021, because the youth unemployment rate is more than 25% according to the official figures, but I believe that it's more than 35%. And secondly, Dr. Yeşilaka also mentioned that our natural gas imports are made by long-term contracts, and Turkey do not take the advantage of low prices after this COVID-19. And when the Turkish lira depreciates, then we will have very, very high natural gas price in Turkey, and this will lead to a very big protest by the consumers in Turkey. Therefore, we should even take into account a potential of social unrest, and then I can tell you what to do for the next way as a potential investor.
Okay. My last question for both of you, Dr. Atilia and Dr. Omar. As there would be economic winners and losers, how would this affect the redistribution of power in the political landscape and influentials in decision making? Dr. Omar?
Well, the political winners of this crisis is potentially the opposition. I think if you are a opposition voter, be it for the CHP or the E Party or the newly emerging political parties, they have now an economic crisis, and the economic crisis is an opportunity for the opposition. It's the same with all democracies, you know. Thank God we can say that elections do still matter in Turkey, and I hope that there will be an election that will basically solve the governance crisis of Turkey. Right now in the United States, for instance, the big loser of this coronavirus, in my opinion, is the Trump administration. The way it handled the crisis, the economic downturn, and there is new blood with the Democratic, there's a hope that the Democrats can come to power. In Turkey, I think the similar dynamics apply. If you're the incumbent and if you've been in power for almost 20 years, which is the case of Erdogan, we have seen how he lost the municipal elections in Istanbul, in Izmir, in almost all big urban areas of Turkey, because the young people and the people who are basically tired of AKP are looking for alternatives. So the winner, in my opinion, of this crisis is potentially the opposition, and the loser is Erdogan and the AKP.
Dr. Yaşarada?
I agree with everything Dr. Tashpinar said. I just want to make a few points about long-term dynamics in Turkish politics. It's changing in many ways, but I would like to just bullet point 3A. The CHP mayors, and I'm quoting surveys, not my personal opinion, have received very high approval ratings despite the obstacles thrown in their way by AKP, which means now the people understand that the welfare programs or welfare benefits are not the personal gift of Mr. Erdogan, but it's a right for being a citizen. So that changes Turkish political dynamics and makes the presidential system less unpalatable. Two, the share of first-time and young voters increase, and these people are much more pragmatic, much more tolerant, and they receive their information from social media, which is less censored than the official media. Three, finally, we have a conservative Turkish bourgeoisie. There is AKP voters who settled in the cities, finally have changed their attitudes. Again, quoting Konda poll, Metropole poll, these people are now strong defenders of status quo in the sense that they don't want social unrest, as Dr. Kubilay said. They don't want capital controls. They don't want a major fight with the West, not because they like the West, but because they understand that Turkey's economic interests collide with the West, and fighting with the West is best for FDI tourism and their export orders. I think these three changes, coupled with Erdogan's, in my view, complete failure to reinvigorate the economy this summer, will bring the end of this regime. Either he will have to change policies and call an IMF, or call snap elections and possibly lose.
So you consider Erdogan loser or winner?
No, loser, definitely.
Dr. Ever, is loser or winner? Portugal.
Loser.
Okay. Now I will give a chance for our viewers for their question. We have one from Yusuf Sharif. What are the chances for Turkey's economy to survive without going to IMF? Can swap deals and early opening for the market in Turkey help to avoid a de-evaluation crisis? Who would like to take this question?
I'll take. Go ahead, Kubilay.
Okay, you first. You are more senior.
Okay, there is really no way for Turkey to survive without IMF. I mean, Kubilay will probably get into debt dynamics once again, but I want to talk about anything else. The balance sheet destruction, which is very ill understood. The fact that banks have so many bad loans is because the corporate sector is unable to make payments. According to World Bank studies, Turkish productivity, total factor productivity, and company profitability has been declining since 2012. On top of these, Erdogan made a huge mistake of building its rescue program largely on loans and loan deferrals. So the banks have made loans which they know will not come back. And companies have taken on loans just to survive, which they will not be able to pay back because IMF both expect 5% decline in real GDP. It is this balance sheet devastation. The fact that thousands of small companies, medium-sized companies, can go bankrupt by the end of the year. And that would reflect even worse to the bank balance sheets. So much so, I mean, they won't go insolvent, but their capital asset ratios will decline to Basel requirement levels, which means they won't be able to make new loans. And the only way to avoid that is to call IMF and get funds, simply because even if Mr. Erdogan swore on the Quran that he's going to implement all the structural reforms that IMF suggests and played cleanly by the book, he lacks credibility. Central Bank of Turkey lacks credibility. Turkey at large lacks credibility. What IMF will bring in is not only a loan and foreign investors, but a credibility that the necessary changes to this heterodox policies will be made.
Thank you. Let's go to the other question. Maybe Dr. Omar, you can answer this. This is a question from Dr. Karar Abbas from Iraq. He's asking about how is the coronavirus pandemic can affect the regional, the Turkish regional policy.
So the Turkish regional policy, as I mentioned, depends on which region you're looking at, but I assume he's looking at the border area, Iraq, Syria, Iran. And overall, there is a risk in, as I said, a kind of foreign policy adventure. One thing that Turkey can engage in if Erdogan feels desperate in terms of getting the nationalist vote behind him is a cross-border operation to Iraq. To the areas where the PKK has a safe haven. Attacking the PKK is always a vote winner for the nationalists. And so the PKK, as you know, has a safe haven. The real safe haven is in Kandil Mountain in northern Iraq. So a Turkish operation there, an air operation or a short-term ground operation could bring some nationalist votes and create a sense of, nationalist mobilization. I don't see Turkey engaging in Idlib, in a kind of mobilization in Idlib. I think relations with Russia are too tense, and I don't expect any kind of change in the status quo in Idlib. As far as Iran is concerned, I think Turkey doesn't want any kind of adventure with Iran. Turkey wants stability with Iran. And so I don't expect really with these three border countries to change. I don't also expect anything in terms of relations with Israel or Egypt or UAE. I mean, the problems with Israel, UAE, Egypt are centered on structural issues that are not likely to change quickly. And by structural issues, I mean, for instance, Turkey's support for the Muslim Brotherhood. That's not likely to change really in relations with Egypt or UAE. I think the Muslim Brotherhood issue is still part of Erdogan's worldview, and it's a vote winner for him at home. And also in terms of, I think, foreign policy, he can claim that the Muslim Brotherhood, the Turkish support for the Muslim Brotherhood is support for democracy. So he will continue this kind of narrative in this kind of anti-Western and anti-American discourse. So regional policy, I don't expect anything good. I could potentially something negative happening in the short term, especially if he calls for snap elections.
Yeah, but he has a good relation with Israel.
With whom?
With Israel.
With Israel?
Yeah.
Turkey's relations with Israel, I would say, the Turkey's relations with Israel are economically sound. Despite the downturn in diplomatic relations, Turkey still doesn't have an ambassador in Israel. There are still problems in terms of Turkish-Israeli relations. However, the economic relationship, the trade partnership, the trade relations have been good. There's an opening with Netanyahu engaged in a coalition government now. And I think the only thing that could really change the Turkish-Israeli diplomatic dynamics is the change of power in these two countries. Netanyahu and Erdogan have too much bad blood in the past. There's too much baggage to this kind of history that I don't really see much improvement in relations with Israel, other than the economic dynamics, which will continue because the private sector in both countries are used to trading with each other.
Thank you. There is a question to Dr. Kobolai, and I don't know about this information from where Adnan Leach, he said, Why has so much money left Turkey recently? Around 10 billion. Have you got an idea?
Whose money is it?
I don't know.
Because $10 billion is quite a big amount of money, and Turkish government is trying to
I'm
find
sorry,
a new
10 million. 10 million is nothing, I think. $10 million is nothing.
Yes.
Billion.
Yes,
Right.
if it were 10 billion, I mean, it's an important amount for the Turkish government because they spent more than 2 months just to find a new swap agreement with another central banks.
Yeah.
And so the $10 billion is very important amount. But as far from solving the problems of Turkish external debt, may I also include this merge this question with the previous question about the IMF because I want to share with you some numbers. Dr. Yeshtada already mentioned that the corporate sector's balance sheet is very weak because dollar denominated or dollar indexed bonds is about 170 billion US dollars. It's a very high amount. And secondly, the non-performing loan of the banking industry is officially 6%, but my guess, my estimation is around 10%, and the contagion factor is very high. So we should also think about this. And thirdly, the 50% of the government, central government's debt is denominated in dollar and euro as well. And we don't have any money as a foreign exchange reserve in the Central Bank of Republic of Turkey. Then what you need to do is to apply for the only source of long-term FX finance, which is IMF. But I think we should talk about another part of this question. Do you really think that the IMF will accept an agreement with Turkey? When Turkey may want or not, Erdogan may change his ideas, but I don't believe that IMF is ready to make such an agreement with Turkey. So I have two main points for this. First one is the United States can veto a potential standby agreement with IMF. We should always take into this account due to the CATSA sanctions because of the S-400 purchase. And secondly, IMF had an agreement with Argentina 2 years ago, and now the current Argentina government is not so willing to pay their money back. So just can you compare the situation in Argentina with Turkey? Erdogan is not a very reliable man for the West. He's not a stable politician. So it's not that easy for Turkey to reach the source of income from a source of funds from IMF. So it's better to think about the other side of this issue. Not only Turkey, but also IMF is not very willing to collaborate to solve the Turkey's debt problem.
Okay. There is a question, maybe this is the last question. Maybe Dr. Attila, you can answer this. This question about can currency swap, such as the one between Qatar and Turkey, help revive the Turkish lira? Also, what is the impact of the currency swap between Qatar and Turkey?
It is largely what we call in the investment banking business optic or cosmetic, because the agreement stipulates that Qatari riyals cannot be exchanged for dollars. So they just inflate the net foreign assets of Turkish Central Bank, but doesn't add to the liquidity of the Turkish Central Bank. There will be no swaps with Fed or IMF for reasons Dr. Kubilay explained. And Bank of England says we have never heard from Turkey that they want one. These swap deals need to be understood are made between large trading partners who have mutual interests and on the two conditions. A, the central bank is completely independent of the political authority, which is a joke in Turkey. B, they are to correct temporary imbalances in the balance of payments. That is, for some reason, a country can't export or the price of exports have fallen, and it's a temporary cash squeeze. But as my colleagues here have pointed out repeatedly, why Turkey's central bank has lost so many reserves is a foolish attempt to control the level of the exchange rate. We estimate that over the last 12 months, state banks acting on behalf of Turkish central bank sold $40 billion, and still Turkish lira depreciated by 15% against the dollar. So nobody is going to do swaps with Turkey. And even if they do, it's going to be wasted in this futile effort to defend an exchange rate.
The end. Thank you all, Dr. Tashminar, Dr. Yashilada, Dr. Ubulai, for this wonderful conversation. And we hope we meet you again in another webinar. Stay safe and healthy. And thanks very much. And thanks for all our viewers for following us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been a pleasure. Good evening now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.